There was a pause, just a fraction of a second. But in a Mike Tyson fight, pauses didn't happen. He moved forward. He closed distance. He ended things. That's what people expected. That's what had happened in every fight before this one. But on August 1st, 1987, in the Las Vegas Hilton, after the first exchange of punches between Tyson and Tony Tucker, there was a pause. And in that pause, something shifted. Tyson stood in the center of the ring, his guard still up, his feet planted. He had just thrown a combination. Left hook to the body, right hand upstairs. The kind of combination that had folded other men. But Tucker was still standing. More than that, he had moved backward smoothly, absorbed the pressure, and snapped a jab into Tyson's face as he tried to follow. It wasn't a devastating punch. It didn't hurt Tyson, but it landed clean. And when Tyson reset and looked across the ring at Tucker, something registered in his expression that the cameras caught, but most people didn't understand until later. Recognition. This was going to be different. Tony Tucker was 6'5". He had an 82-inch reach. When he stood upright with his jab extended, there was a wall of distance between him and anyone trying to get inside. He wasn't just tall. He was athletic. He moved like a middleweight in a heavyweight's body, fast feet, quick hands. And unlike most of the fighters Tyson had faced, Tucker wasn't intimidated. He was the IBF heavyweight champion. He had his own belt, his own reputation. And when he looked at Tyson across the ring during the referee's instructions, there was no fear in his eyes. Just focus. Tyson was 21 years old. He was the WBA and WBC heavyweight champion. He had destroyed everyone they put in front of him. Trevor Berbick, James Smith, Pinklin Thomas. Every fight had been a demolition. Most didn't make it past the early rounds. Tyson would come forward, take away space, break them down with body shots, and finish them when their guard dropped. It was systematic. It was inevitable. And it had worked every single time. But Tucker was different. Not because he was better. Not because he hit harder. But because his size and reach created a problem that Tyson couldn't solve with aggression alone. And in the first 30 seconds of the fight, Tyson felt that problem in a way he hadn't felt before. The bell rang, and Tyson came forward the way he always did. Low crouch, head moving. Hands up. He cut off the ring immediately, forcing Tucker toward the ropes. Tucker circled out, using his footwork, keeping the distance. Tyson pressed again. Tucker jabbed. The punch came from what felt like a mile away and snapped Tyson's head back slightly. Tyson slipped the next one and tried to get inside. He threw a left hook aimed at Tucker's ribs. Tucker twisted and the punch glanced off his elbow. Then Tucker pushed him back with a straight right that landed on Tyson's shoulder. Tyson reset. He came forward again. This time he feinted with his head, trying to draw Tucker's jab so he could slip under it and counter. But Tucker didn't bite. He kept his distance, moved his feet, and fired another jab that caught Tyson flush on the forehead. Not a power punch, just a rangefinder. A reminder that Tyson would have to work to get inside. That's when the pause happened. Tyson stopped pressing for just a moment. He stood in the center of the ring, his chest rising and falling steadily, and he looked at Tucker. Not with frustration, not with anger. Just calculation. He had been in this situation before in sparring. Fighting taller men, men with reach. Castemato had drilled it into him. You can't rush. You have to be patient. Wait for the opening. Make them commit. But this was the first time in a professional fight where that lesson actually mattered. Where the usual formula pressure, power, intimidation wasn't going to be enough by itself. Tucker saw the pause too. And for a brief moment, something like confidence flickered across his face. He had survived the first exchange. He had landed clean punches. He had made Tyson think. Maybe, just maybe, this fight wasn't going to go the way everyone predicted. The crowd was buzzing. Not the roar that usually followed a Tyson flurry. Just a low hum of uncertainty. People were leaning forward in their seats. The commentators were filling airtime with observations about Tucker's jab and Tyson's adjustment period. But what they were really saying, without saying it directly, was that this didn't look like the other fights. Tyson hadn't taken over yet. And for the first time in his championship reign, it wasn't clear that he would. Tyson's corner was quiet. Kevin Rooney stood on the ring apron, watching intently, but he didn't shout instructions. He knew Tyson well enough to know that this was part of the process. The adjustment, the recalibration. Tyson had been taught how to fight bigger men. He just hadn't needed to use those lessons yet. Not like this. The rest of the first round played out in the same way. Tucker moving, jabbing, keeping distance. Tyson pressing, probing, looking for openings that weren't quite there yet. When the bell rang, Tyson walked back to his corner without expression. He sat on the stool and took water and listened to Rooney, but his face was blank. Not frustrated, not worried, just focused. "He's not going to come to you," Rooney said quietly. "You have to take the distance away. Make him work. When he jabs, slip and counter. Don't try to walk through it." Tyson nodded. He knew. He had always known. But knowing and doing are different things. And in the heat of the fight, with a man 6 inches taller throwing punches from outside your range, instinct says to rush, to force it. But Tyson didn't rush in the second round. He waited. Tucker came out confident. He had won the first round on every scorecard. He landed his jab early and often. He moved well. But now Tyson was starting to time it. Instead of walking straight into the punches, he was slipping them by inches. Instead of trying to bull his way inside, he was cutting angles, forcing Tucker to reset, making him think. Midway through the second round, Tucker threw a jab and Tyson slipped it to the right. In the same motion, he stepped in and threw a left hook to the body that landed clean. Tucker's expression changed, not pain exactly, but acknowledgement. That punch hurt. Tyson didn't follow up with a flurry. He just stepped back and reset. Patient. The fight went 12 rounds. All 12. It was the first time in Tyson's professional career that he heard the final bell. Tucker didn't fold. He didn't break. He fought every round with discipline and skill. But slowly, incrementally, Tyson took control. Not through explosive knockouts or overwhelming aggression. Through adjustment, through patience. Through the kind of technical mastery that most people didn't associate with Mike Tyson, because they only ever saw the highlight reel knockouts. In the later rounds, Tyson was landing the cleaner punches. His body shots were piling up. His head movement was sharper. Tucker was still dangerous, still competitive. But the tide had turned. And when the judges' scorecards were read, all three had it for Tyson. Unanimous decision. In the dressing room after the fight, Tyson sat on a bench with ice on his knuckles. He wasn't celebrating, wasn't talking, just sitting. Kevin Rooney came over and put a hand on his shoulder. "You did good tonight." Tyson nodded, but his face was thoughtful. This hadn't felt like the other fights. It hadn't felt easy. And in a strange way, that mattered more than the decision, because for the first time in his career, Mike Tyson had faced a problem that couldn't be solved with intimidation. A fighter who wasn't afraid, who had the physical tools to keep him at bay. And Tyson had won not by overpowering him, but by adjusting, by being patient, by trusting the lessons Customato had taught him years ago in that gym in Catskill. That night, Tyson became the undisputed heavyweight champion. He unified all 3 major belts. He was 21 years old, the youngest undisputed champion in history. But the real victory wasn't the belts. It was the realization that his power wasn't just physical. It was mental. It was the ability to recognize when the usual approach wasn't working and adjust in real time. To fight a different kind of fight when the situation demanded it. Tony, Tucker gave Tyson something no one else had given him up to that point. 12 rounds. A full fight. A test that required more than just aggression and intimidation. And Tyson passed. Not with a knockout, not with a highlight that would play on loop for decades, but with patience and discipline and the kind of technical skill that only reveals itself when everything else is taken away. The first exchange felt different because it was different. Tyson couldn't just walk through Tucker's jab. He couldn't close the distance with raw will. He had to think, adjust, wait for the right moment. And in that process, he became something more than just a devastating puncher. He became a complete fighter. Years later, people would remember Tyson for the knockouts, for the explosions of violence that ended fights in seconds. And those moments were real. They mattered. But the people who really understood boxing, the ones who studied the craft, they would point to the Tucker fight as something equally important. The night Mike Tyson learned that power without patience is just noise, and that the ability to adjust, to recognize when intimidation isn't enough, is what separates a fighter from a champion. Tony Tucker stood across the ring and didn't back down. He used his size, his reach, his skill, and for the first time, Tyson had to solve a problem that didn't have a simple answer. He couldn't just be Mike Tyson, destroyer of men. He had to be Mike Tyson, student of the craft. And when he won that fight, he won something bigger than a belt. He won the knowledge that he could adapt. That when the usual tools didn't work, he had others. And that realization, more than any knockout, more than any title, was what made him truly dangerous. Because a fighter who only knows one way to win is predictable. But a fighter who can adjust, who can recognize in real time that the script has changed and respond accordingly, that fighter is nearly impossible to prepare for. The first exchange felt different. And Tyson felt it. And instead of forcing the issue, instead of trying to make the fight fit his expectations, he changed his approach. He trusted his training. He waited, and in the end, he won. Not because he was the biggest or the strongest or the most intimidating, but because when the situation demanded it, he could be patient. He could adapt. He could think. That's what made Mike Tyson more than just a puncher. That's what made him a fighter. And it all started with that pause. That moment after the first exchange when he looked across the ring at a bigger man and realized that this time, intimidation alone wouldn't be enough. You've probably felt that moment in your own life. Not in a boxing ring, but somewhere. The moment when your usual approach doesn't work. When the problem in front of you is bigger than you expected. When confidence alone won't carry you through. Maybe it was a job you thought you'd dominate. A conversation you thought would go your way. A challenge you assumed you could handle with the same tools that had always worked before. And then reality hit. And you realized in that first exchange that this was different. The instinct is to push harder. To force it. To double down on what's always worked. But sometimes that's not the answer. Sometimes you have to pause, adjust, recognize that the script has changed, and you need to change with it. Tyson could have kept rushing forward. Could have tried to overwhelm Tucker with volume and aggression. Maybe it would have worked eventually. Maybe not. But what he did instead was harder. He adapted. He trusted the lessons he'd been taught. He waited for the right moment instead of forcing one. That's not weakness. That's intelligence. That's maturity. And it's the difference between winning once and winning consistently. You don't always get to choose the size of the problem standing across from you. You don't get to decide whether intimidation will work or whether your usual tools will be enough. But you do get to choose how you respond when they're not. Do you keep forcing it? Or do you pause, adjust, and find another way? Mike Tyson paused. And in that pause, he found the answer. Not immediately. Not in the first round. But over 12 rounds, through patience and discipline and adjustment, he solved a problem that couldn't be solved with power alone. The first exchange felt different because it was different. And recognizing that difference, instead of denying it, was what made all the difference. Maybe the question isn't whether you'll face something bigger than you. You will. The question is whether you'll have the patience to adjust when your first approach doesn't work. Asterisk.